Once upon a time, there were a king and queen who said each day, "Oh, if we only had a child!" But they never got one. Once, while the queen was bathing, a frog crawled out of the water to the shore and said to her, "Before a year is up, you will give birth to a daughter." It happened as the frog had said. The queen had a daughter who was so beautiful that the king was overjoyed and ordered a great feast. He invited not only his kinsfolk, but his friends and his acquaintances, but also the wise women, so that they would be gracious and kind to the child. There were 13 of them in his kingdom, but because he had only 12 golden plates for them to eat from, one of them had to stay home. The feast was celebrated with all magnificence, and when it was over, the wise women presented the child with their magic gifts, one with virtue, the second with beauty, the third with riches, and so on, with everything in the world one could wish for. After 11 of them had pronounced their blessings, the 13th suddenly entered. She wanted to avenge herself for not having been invited, and without a greeting or so much as a look for anyone, she cried in a loud voice, "In her 15th year, the king's daughter shall prick herself with a spindle, and shall fall down dead." Without another word, she turned her back and left the hall. Everyone was horrified, but the 12th, who still had her wish, came forward. Since she could not revoke the curse, but could only mitigate it, she said, "The king's daughter shall not die, but shall fall into a deep sleep that shall last for 100 years. The king, who wished to guard his beloved child against this misfortune, had orders given that all the spindles in the entire kingdom were to be burned. All the gifts of the wise women were fulfilled in the girl. She was so beautiful, virtuous, kind, and intelligent that she won the hearts of all who looked on her. It happened that on her 15th birthday, the king and queen were away from home, and the girl stayed behind all alone in the castle. She went about wherever she pleased, looking at the rooms and chambers, and came at last to an old tower. She climbed the narrow spiral staircase and arrived at a little door. A rusty key was in the lock, and when she turned it, the door sprang open. There, in a little room, sat an old woman with a spindle, busily spinning flax. "How do you do, Granny?" said the king's daughter. "What are you doing?" "I'm spinning," said the old woman, nodding her head. "What is that thing that bobs up and down so merrily?" asked the king's daughter, and took the spindle because she wanted to spin too. But she had hardly touched the spindle when the magic spell was fulfilled, and she pricked her finger. The very moment she felt the prick, she fell down on a bed which was standing there, and lay in a deep sleep, and the sleep spread throughout the castle. The king and queen, who had just come home and entered the hall, fell asleep, and with them the entire court. The horses went to sleep in the stable, the dogs in the courtyard, and the pigeons on the roof. The flies on the wall, yes, even the fire flickering on the hearth grew still and slept, and the roast stopped sizzling, and the cook, who was about to pull the scullery boy's hair for some mistake, let him go and slept. The wind dropped, and not a leaf stirred on the trees in front of the castle. A briar hedge began to grow around the castle. It got bigger each year, until at last it surrounded the castle completely and covered it so that nothing of the castle could be seen any more, not even the flag on the roof. But a legend arose in the land about the beautiful sleeping Briar Rose, for that is what they called the king's daughter, so that from time to time king's sons came and tried to break through the hedge into the castle. But it was impossible because the briars clung tightly together as though they had hands, and the young men got caught in them and could not get free again, so that they perished miserably. After many long years, another king's son came into the land and heard an old man telling about the briar hedge. There was supposed to be a castle behind it, in which a wonderfully beautiful king's daughter, called Briar Rose, had been sleeping for 100 years, and with her slept the king and queen and the entire court. His grandfather had told him that many king's sons had already tried to penetrate the briar hedge, but they had got caught in it and died a wretched death. "I am not afraid," said the young man. "I will try to see the beautiful Briar Rose." No matter how much the good old man tried to warn him against it, he did not listen to him. Now the 100 years was just up, and the day had come on which Briar Rose was to wake up again. When the king's son approached the briar hedge, it had become a mass of large and beautiful flowers that separated of themselves to let him pass unharmed, then closed behind him like a hedge. In the courtyard he saw the horses and the spotted hunting dogs lying asleep. On the roof the pigeons perched with their little heads nestled under their wings. and when he came into the house, the flies were asleep on the walls. The cook in the kitchen still held out his hand to grab the boy, and the kitchen maid was sitting before the black hen that she had to pluck. He continued on, and in the hall the entire court were lying asleep, and above them, next to the throne, lay the king and queen. He went still further on, and everything was so quiet that he could hear the sound of his own breathing. Finally, he came to the tower and opened the door to the little room where Briar Rose was sleeping. There she lay, so beautiful that he could not take his eyes from her, and he bent down and kissed her. At the touch of his kiss, Briar Rose opened her eyes, awoke, and looked at him very tenderly. Together they went down, and the king and queen and the entire court woke up and looked at each other wide-eyed with astonishment. The horses in the courtyard got up and shook themselves. The hunting dogs jumped and wagged their tails. The pigeons on the roof pulled their heads out from under their wings, looked around, and flew off to the fields. The flies began to crawl along the walls. The fire in the kitchen blazed up and flickered and cooked the dinner. The roast started to sizzle again. The cook slapped the boy so that he cried, and the kitchen maid finished plucking the hen. And then the wedding of the king's son and Briar Rose was celebrated with all magnificence, and they lived happily for the rest of their lives. And the moral of the story is, it's better to be lucky than good.